Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ivan Jovanovic, and in front of Belgrade Metropolitan University and Faculty of Management, I welcome you to web discussion on a very hot topic. So we have the pandemic, we have lobbying, we have public affairs. Welcome to the lobbying and public affairs during the pandemic. I will guide you through today's panel. We have a rare opportunity to hear three great practitioners as well as researchers. We will hear some great experience and also some very important lessons and the conclusions from the pandemic. Our first speaker comes from Berlin, Germany, Mr. Dominik Meier. Guten Tag, Herr Meier, freut mich. Mr. Meier is the chairman of the most influential association of political consultants in Germany, BDB. Besides that, Mr. Meier is co-owner and senior partner at Miller Meier Consulting. Besides that, Mr. Meier is prominent member of the international web FIPRA. And last but definitely not the least, Mr. Meier is co-author of a great book, Power and Its Logic. Our next speaker, Dr. Stewart Thompson, comes from London, United Kingdom. Hello, Dr. Thompson. Dr. Thompson is listed by Total Politics in top 100 lobbying and public affairs consultants. He's also the lecturer at PERSA and CIPR, associations that deal with the public relations. Besides that, Dr. Thompson this year won an award as the online influencer of the year for 2020. So it is just great. We're gonna talk about that in a few minutes. And as I said, last but not least, Dr. Thompson is the author of a few books on public, on PA and lobbying. Some of them are New Activism and Corporate Response, Public Affairs in Practice, the Dictionary of Labor Connotations, and Public Affairs. And from Belgrade, Serbia, our next speaker, Professor Ana Bovan. Professor Bovan is a lobbying practitioner and a researcher since 1993. She advises many companies, including those from Fortune 500. Besides that, she is founder and the first president of Serbian Lobbyist Association, and she is also the first vice president of the Serbian Managers Association. Besides that, she is the member of PACE, and of course, she is a professor of negotiation, lobbying, and a few other subjects at Belgrade Metropolitan University. So, as you can guess, we're gonna have a great discussion, and today's discussion is very specific. So let's start. We will cover three major topics. First, lobbying and public affairs during the pandemic. After that, increased digitalization in public affairs and lobbying industries. And of course, the question of transparency and regulation. Just a few house rules before we start. The discussion will take from 40 to 45 minutes. After that, we will have some time for Q&A. So please be free to type your questions in English during the discussion so we can try to answer most of them during the Q&A session. So we can start if you're ready. Pandemic hit hard everyone. It affected businesses and professionals and many industries. So, Dr. Thompson, let's start with you. How did pandemic affect public affairs and lobbying industry in United Kingdom, but also in general?
I think the first thing it's done, or the first impact that it's had, is the sort of the usual business of government has been paused. So usually you can expect a whole range of different policy areas across, I don't know, tax or planning or infrastructure, or all different areas. Normally as public affairs and as lobbyists, we can help our clients and organisations engage in those discussions. The trouble is most of those discussions just haven't taken place. Everything has been focused on the COVID and the pandemic and dealing with it. Now, for some organisations, you could say that that means they've been busier than ever. If they've been doing lots of direct engagement with government, so they needed support for particular sectors, then they've had lots of direct engagement. But for others, maybe sort of less frontline, if you can use that term, then there's been less to do. So it's very much a sort of a mixed picture. So I think that's the first thing. The second main change that it's led to is that, you know, our traditional ways of engaging have disappeared. So, you know, normally we'd be busy organising events in Parliament, or, you know, in the devolved institutions, or, you know, for mayors around the UK now, which have been put in place in recent years, having one-to-one meetings. All those things, obviously, they've all disappeared. You know, the lockdown, you know, social distancing, etc. All of that means that none of that can sort of happen. So that usual interaction has gone. So that means we've had to shift focus. Now, I say that, but sort of slightly ironically, politicians that we've dealt with, in some ways, have had more time. So they've been, in some ways, more accessible via Zoom than maybe sometimes they are, you know, in face to face. I mean, whether that's a consequence of sort of, you know, them just being sort of, you know, not having to run around and, you know, move from, you know, place to place to have meetings or something. I'm not entirely sure what the reason is, but capturing some of their time has been, you know, via Zoom has been quite sort of, you know, quite effective. And I think the flip side, so we've had to look for other ways to do that engagement. So the media, and I'm sure Dominik and Professor Bovan will talk more about this as well, you know, some of those media side of things as well. So looking for other channels to secure our influence has been there as well. So, you know, when I think about, you know, some of the sort of the really big lobbying campaigns there have been in the UK and you know, around Westminster, you know, this last sort of year, it's probably one that may well have got sort of a bit more international coverage, which is Marcus Rashford. So, you know, Manchester United and England footballer has been campaigning for school meals for children, and what he did quite successfully, you know, not are they traditional or are they not, but, you know, a lot more use of media and social media. Again, I know we're going to come on to talk about these things as part of those campaigns, as part of his very successful campaign. So, you know, so in some ways it's shifted us, in other ways it hasn't. So I'm not sure I can quite give a sort of one definitive answer, but from my perspective anyway.
Yes, that sounds right. And Mr. Meier, how about Germany, as someone who leads the most influential association of German political consultants, BDB, most influential in Germany and probably most influential in whole Europe? Would you say that situation was quite similar in Germany in general, or there are some differences?
So thank you very much for the invitation and for the brilliant preparation of the meeting. And I wish Stewart is a complicated issue, but to start with some kind of clear answer, in Germany, we, the public affairs community, is the winner of the crisis. To make it really clear, we are not PR, public relations, we are not marketing, we are doing public affairs, and we're doing the public affairs. Everybody needs us because of why? The political sector is so important and so powerful than never before in Germany. So everybody, from the big companies, from every kind of association, organization, or NGOs, asking us what happens. Because if you have a day-to-day politic, like I think also in the UK, especially with Boris Johnson and the Brexit next to this, we have to see, okay, what is going on? Dominik, Ivan, Stewart, Anna, please tell me. And this was monitoring, intelligence was so important, and also to give advice how you can influence via the digitization with new instruments. But we're coming later to this point. And the second most important, what we learned in Germany as a whole community was we have started so many financial help funds for recovering. And it was so complicated to understand what's going on. And so one of the most important tasks was, and was special for this crisis period, is to support our clients to understand if I can have this money from financial support from this help funds or not, and how we can do it, because it was so complicated. And this was also an important point, that we can, that public affairs could support our client system. And this was the reason from the outside why I can say we offered our services like before the crisis. It was the most intensive time for a lot of my colleagues in Germany. I don't think in Brussels, but in Germany. But Stewart can some more insights, or Ana, about Brussels again. And therefore, unfortunately, for so many other people who have suffered day by day, also in Germany, for this small public affairs business was really is dealing really quite well.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, absolutely. Now, for the experience in Serbia and the region, Professor Bovan, as someone who has been practicing lobbying as a practitioner, as a practitioner consultant, as well as a professor, what can you say is specific regarding this matter for Serbia and the region?
Well, thanks very much, Ivan, and thanks for hosting this and doing a great job in getting us all together. To you, and of course to a colleague who is unseen here, but is absolutely holding the reins. That's Bojana Domazet from the uni. So thanks, Bojana, very much for your help. Very happy to hear some of the things are similar, Dominik mentioned, and clearly there may be some specifics, but I think overall things are pretty much as Dominik said, yes, did achieve a boom. I can't say that it's completely a winner, but it definitely has some traits of also being a winning industry in this situation, especially because I think that lobbying is going to have to become a regular part of the tool set for preparing for change and for preparing for big crises. So in that sense as well, on a general level, yes, it is a winner. I think it definitely is, because it broadens its managerial impact as well. It's not just something that somebody else does on the outside when we need some help with in Berlin or in Westminster or in Brussels or in the Congress and the Senate, but actually becomes something that managers will do on a much more regular basis, expecting probably even more pandemics and more crazy things happening concerning the change that's affecting every company. Also, the fiscal measures that the state has given a lot of rise and push for some linking with the politicians that are, I'm sure, not only in Germany but everywhere else, ever more important and very a deciding factor in the lives of companies and individuals. We also had elections during the pandemic, so this clearly shifted lots of things in that sense. So there was lobbying on many layers and many levels at the same time. The increased lobbying for fiscal measures, for the help of the state, which has obviously happened everywhere, was quite intensive, but also it had to happen very fast, because there were weeks and maybe, you know, less than a month of deciding who gets what. And then if you put your word in time, you could get there. You could also be on the list of necessary industries that could stay open and not close down. So clearly that affected your bottom line and sometimes your existence. So there was also lobbying for that, and it was happening quite intensively. Also, as you mentioned, Stewart, there were some citizen campaigns, and that they clearly used a lot of the new media, the social channels. There was social media, there were citizen campaigns, quite a lot for example, for ill children, to give them more support, because the health system was overburdened with the new crisis. And then you had some very kind of charity missions that went on, but they really used a lot of lobbying channels and lobbying methods. So that received a boost. There was a lot of petitioning as well, and because everybody was on their screens, then this was obviously something that could work better. And a lot of citizen campaigns that our colleague Professor Alemano writes about so nicely in his lobbying for change books and others. Yes, there was a lot of that. And concerning Brussels, we all, in a way, saw that initially Europe wasn't completely ready as a whole. There was a lot of individual, sometimes even opposing and even competing activities with countries, but also with the public affairs that followed that. But then it got it at, shall we say, it got its act together, and that there was a lot more synchronicity and working together on the whole of in the EU. And there were quite a lot of actions concerning Business Europe and SME Europe, and trying to push some of the really strong, for example, ecological, environmental restrictions that Europe does have, especially compared to some other markets. And they say, look, you know, now everybody's in a crisis, so let's just give us some space to breathe, and then we'll get back to the very stringent environmental limitations a little bit later. Let us just work on the existential topics and let the companies live. So clearly there was a lot of lobbying in Brussels as well on the counter, big firms and small firms.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Bovan. As we can see, there are some similarities, but also some specifics depending from region to the region. We can slowly shift to our other topic. Digitalization in the pandemic has skyrocketed, but did it change the way that public affairs and lobbying are conducted as we are still in the pandemic? And how it changed it? Mr. Meier, please, if you could go first this time.
Yeah, thank you very much. Again, our public affairs consultancy business is special because we have a lot of international clients on one hand, and we are in consulting and kind of agency business. So we was very, very prepared for digitalization because we was used to have this tool in our daily business. Not so much like Stewart in the online, but in the normal communication. Also in our equipment, in our consultancy, it was easy. So we can change, you know, all my colleagues, also the larger colleagues, also in the company, we can change in seconds to the online world. So nothing happens because of the people are at home office now, but we're working still like before. This makes it really important advantage for the public affairs sector in Germany, that we was really well equipped. This means we don't have the problem like other political colleagues, also parliamentarians, still in Germany. It was not possible in the first weeks to have video conferences, Zoom conferences, team conference, because also of security reasons. So the establishment of the digital world in the political sector was really efficient. And the first important element for public affairs in the Corona crisis was and speed up in Germany, I think in whole Europe, for digitalization in the public sector, also in the parliamentarian political sector. Now you can speak with every parliamentarian, also with the key people in the ministries, so important for us, directly via video conferences. So that's a really important point. The second important point was the politicians are used now to take online communication. They have no other ways. Anna spoke about election campaign in Serbia. So how we also how we can integrate in the election campaigning or the campaigning this new public affairs element. This will be in question. We have learned from the US after the election campaign and in Biden-Trump last year. So that's also an important point that we have a kind of new acceptance of this new style. What we have done, and it was in the beginning complicated between March and April, but starting to be better in May. We take our normal instruments like parliamentary breakfasts, lunch debates. We have done normally in person on a digital way. We needed 9 months, 3 months, and then it's function. So now it's normal for us, also with our clients, to speak together like here today with you all in Zoom conferences and make parliamentary breakfast, have a beer or have a coffee, have a wine, and do it on a digital way. That's now normal. So it was possible in Germany to bring our instruments from the old world, from the analog world, into the digital world. This is an important point, and it's still function. We have learned one thing in our work, in our political public affairs work. It's a question of trust. The key element at the end, politics is living from personal direct contact. You trust people in the political sector, everybody, much easier if you see and have a personal relationship. And still, also in future, we will have a hybrid form of public affairs, I'm sure. But at the end, networking for us, networking for consulting companies like us or for everybody, at the end, we're looking forward to our face-to-face meeting in future. Because networking in politics is to have direct meetings and not digitalization. So yes, this helps us for the moment, and there's nothing we have to do it. But immediately, if the coronavirus situation is more controlled and we can go more out, we will have immediately again our old, more face-to-face meetings.
Yeah, thank you. Sounds about right. We can see that it isn't only the technology that changes, it also changes us.
Yeah.
Now, as they would say at the Eurovision, from Berlin to Belgrade. Professor Bovan, what would be your comment on digitalization practices in lobbying?
Well, I'm actually very happy to hear that some of these practices are now the norm in Germany, and as clearly the leader in so many things in Europe, I hope that we also follow with this. Yes, there's definitely been a shift in using a lot more digital channels, but that we now can talk to clients without any problems over Zoom. It's absolutely accepted. That level of a swift digitalization under the burden of a big crisis has clearly happened. So obviously we can all go through some of these revolutions if we have to. And I'm sure it would have taken so much longer if there wasn't a crisis like this. But okay, now it's here. We can talk to the clients, and there is definitely trust. We do have coffees and discussions. But to actually do the final step and then talk to the regulators, to parliamentarians, onto the executive branch, it's still a little more difficult. Unless there is a huge level of trust, there's been a lot of communication, and then that's possible. But it's still that final step will need a little more time to happen. Clearly, the widening of the channels has definitely happened. There is a lot more influence even on clearly the politicians, decision makers, the ones who make public policy, using the digital channels, and even the ones who have not really been paying attention have now started to pay attention to what's happening in the well, Twitter sphere, or whichever sphere, your Instagram sphere, whichever you're following. So that now has a lot more effect than before. And a lot of people have taken up, especially the politicians, clearly Twitter. And so now there is a lot more understanding what happens there, and there is a lot more caution what happens there. I think that this will clearly not go back completely to the old ways. It will be, as Dominik mentioned, a combination. We can easily go back, but it will also remain with some of these things and some of these channels, and then use them. The fact that hopefully there will be a lot more with digital channels, there will be a lot more opportunity for more transparency. That clearly the digital contacts, the openness, the public effect of that maybe has an opportunity to grow now. That everything is in a way somewhere marked and can be seen and can be tracked. I think could add to more transparency, and also I hope that is also a good side of the pandemic that brought to public affairs and lobbying. Thanks.
Thank you. That's very interesting, very useful for all of us. We can see that level of trust is probably something that still needs to be worked on, as Mr. Meier said, and as you, Professor Bovan, said. Now, from Belgrade, we go to London. Dr. Thompson, first, please let me congratulate you on an award for the Online Influencer of the Year. I'm sorry that we can see it right now because you said it's made from the recyclables, but maybe some other time. I'm sure that you will have some great comments on digitalization in public affairs industry. So we are all ears.
Thank you. I'll desperately try not to disappoint. I mean, the public affairs consultancies themselves, I mean, there's the parts that Dominik and Ana have talked about, which is the sort of the Zoom calls and trying to do that. I mean, what the consultants have been very good at, and quite quickly, is doing lots of sort of the PR and marketing themselves as well. So the number of sort of webinars that public affairs firms have organised, and podcasts and things like that, sort of, I don't know, grown exponentially since the lockdown. So on that score, a lot of consultancies have been very good at their sort of digital output side of things. I think on the campaign side it's a bit more mixed. Some have relied more on those digital channels than others, and I mentioned the Marcus Rashford one earlier on, which has dealt with them very well, I think. But I'd sort of take it back, and I think it's almost to reiterate the point Ana and Dominik have made about trust, which is, we still come back to the fundamentals of public affairs about influence and engaging with the right people at the right time, the solutions and sort of, the asks of government, all that remain the same, whether we're in a pandemic or at any other point. So, the channels are important at certain times. Equally, at other times, if that social media channel isn't going to get you to the people that you want to influence, then don't bother. So it might well be that we ease off some of those. And again, when we come out, it may be more applicable to some of those audiences, but it's the channels to get to the audiences, not the channels themselves, that are of critical importance, I think. And I my hope is that, and my expectation to an extent, and again, it bears out this point of sort of trust and faith, and the importance of face-to-face, is when you look at surveys, generally, politicians will, and I think it was a Video survey here in the UK. So whilst politicians will, say listen to social media and will use it at a constituency level, so for their local electorate, that becomes very important. But actually, that's still the most important, way to communicate effectively with a politician is being beside them, talking to them, having that face-to-face engagement. So my sort of hope, and maybe this is just a personal hope as well, is that we do go back by and large to some, personal human contact again, and then it will balance itself out over a period of time. But I think initially people will be desperate for some proper human contact. So there will probably be more events and more meetings taking place in the very short term than we've ever seen before. And then it will balance out between the online and the personal.
Thank you, Dr. Thompson. I think that everyone would agree with me when I say that we are all looking forward to those face-to-face interactions that we are all desperately waiting for. 12 points to London. Now from London to another topic. One of the most discussed issues concerning PA and lobbying is the question of regulation. Professor Bovan, in your new book about lobbying, you discuss regulation as one of the most contested topics for lobbying. Would you say there has been any changes and movements on that front?
Thanks. Yes, I think it's quite a contested topic in so many ways, how you regulate, whether it's internally within the industry, within the association, so it's externally with laws, as Serbia has last year launched finally its law on lobbying. So it's a specific law that regulates lobbying per se. And of course, there are many other regulations that regulate so many fields that lobbying does touch. I think that as it is a very specific nexus of power and communication and interest groups and interests, it will always be kind of elusive for regulation. There is, I mean, as many lobbyists and as many political theorists you have different opinions on whether a regulation is in fact possible and how it's conducted. And we've got the Canadian and US and you know, a few other, but especially US experiences where, you know, there is a lot of comment that there is not really any real oversight of lobbying, what is considered lobbying, when it starts. So there were a million questions. Depends how you define lobbying, whether it starts when you're still doing your analysis, background checks, is that lobbying, or is it when you actually face a senator, or when you just send an email to your congressman in your parliament. There are so many different ways of doing it. I think what the pandemic brings into this is the fact that maybe there'll be a little more oversight and there'll be some more discussions about new channels, as clearly digitalization has entered this. So I think that will be something new that maybe concerning regulation and transparency, where there is regulation, because regulation is an acceptance. Sorry, it's not something that is a rule. It's in fact an exception. So only a very small number of countries do, by specific laws, regulate lobbying. Most of the countries in the world, a huge majority don't. There is no regulation by laws, by specific laws. Clearly, there is a lot of regulation that deals with so many other things like integrity of public officials, corruption, and so many things that do sometimes get entangled with lobbying. Of course, lobbying is nothing like that. Lobbying is and public affairs is very transparent and very often legitimate defending of interest groups and interests with decision makers. But as there is this very specific nexus of, as I said, power and interest, yes, there is an opportunity to abuse that position. And then if there are no laws that regulate possible abuse of that kind of position and power, yes, clearly, then it is a big problem. But most of the democracies have that. So I think that if there is any change concerning regulation, I think it'll have to be with the new channels. And concerning Serbia, yes, we have a new law, and there hasn't been, and of course we have a register as well, but there has not been too much of reporting of lobbying activity officially, because the law was just enacted, and only, well, shall we say, a few months later there was a pandemic. So I think that's brought in a little bit of confusion and how to go about it. And we are very eager to see the development of application of that law, and hopefully we will have not only as researchers an opportunity to study that and suggest some maybe better things, but also to actually use it. So that's my intervention for now.
Thank you, Professor Bovan. We will see what will happen with the regulation of new channels regarding digitalization of lobbying. Now, Dr. Thompson, you published several books on public affairs and lobbying, including the study, or better to say, comparative practices of many European systems. What would be your conclusions from that study regarding the regulation?
I think it's, as I mentioned, it's a very mixed bag. Countries do it in different ways, and they take different approaches to their regulations. I mean, the general thrust and the general direction is towards statutory regulation. And governments increasingly come under pressure, often because of some allegation of sleaze, and that's often one of the sort of tools that they'll move to, is to say, well, that will introduce some legislation. Now, whether that legislation ends up being any good or not, I think is a question. I mean, certainly when I think about the Westminster Parliament, we have voluntary codes and we have statutory codes, so we have both. So the statutory code is quite narrow in its definition. It's only a very specific type of lobbying. and you have to be paid for it as well. So for instance, it doesn't cover in-house practitioners at all. They could be doing exactly the same work, having more influence, more engagement, but because they're not being paid for it, I'm a consultant lobbyist, I get paid to do it. Because they're not being paid for it, they don't count. So there are drawbacks with the statutory code. There haven't been any particular changes in recent years, but I think actually just a few months ago there was some new guidance, and they've sort of, well, depending on one's interpretation, either clarified things or extended the definitions a little. You can again have an argument about that, but certainly they've made the guidance slightly clearer, and on the that's the same is true for the voluntary codes, and the voluntary codes primarily through the PRCA Public Affairs Board and the CIPR as well. So they both have quite clear codes, and the PRCA one in particular tend to take quite a what's what I'm looking for, sort of a more open and more robust enforcement action, but also are quite public in the way that they will, comment on things as well. So if there are some allegations of sleaze, which there have been in recent months, the PRCA Public Affairs Board will often stand up and, take a very public position and defend the sector, or indeed, if they think that action needs to be taken, they'll say so as well. So I think that really does help us. What I think may well happen in the coming months, and it brings us back to the sort of pandemic and COVID side of things, is that there have been, again, some sort of newspaper articles and allegations about the way that some contracts have been awarded by government, and the fact that some public affairs firms have been given contracts by government, and the way that was handled has come under the media spotlight. Now, of course, just to be very clear, I am not suggesting that anybody has done anything wrong here and that anybody hasn't followed any rules, but there is a public perception that maybe things weren't done quite properly. Now, whether that then brings in the regulator and whether that brings in government to look again at the rules and the statutory code, so I think we may well see change potentially in the coming months as a direct consequence of the pandemic and the awarding of some contracts.
Thank you very much, Dr. Thompson. Yes, we will definitely see what the new potential changes will be. Thank you for great examples. Mr. Meier, in your book, Power and Its Logic, you write how to master politics. Would you say that regulation of lobbying helps democracies?
So thanks. First, I'm with Ana and Stewart. I don't want to repeat what they're saying because they are completely on the same line. Take it on this point, power needs every time justification. You have to explain every time why you do things in politics. So you have to do it. It's a must, because every politician have to say, okay, I do this, why? Because of X, Y, Z. That's a really, really important point. And if you explain something, you have to be transparent. But I think also the dialectic, take it on this way, between transparency on one hand and power on the other hand. It's every kind of dialectic system. But also public affairs and lobbying. We are part in a democratic system to influence our own interests or interests for others, what we're doing as consultants, to do something. And we have to be aware of this. And this means also, if you are part, in Germany, we are the lobbying and the interest groups, we are also part in our constitution. So we are part of the democratic system. And if we are aware on this, we need to look on ourselves, and we need to think if it's enough for self-regulation of public affairs in Germany, or we need more. And because we have some black sheep everywhere in lobbying, like Stewart mentioned and Anna also, and this means, yes, we need regulation from outside because of the black sheep. If only we have 2 or 3 black sheep, it's enough. So we haven't we started of lobbying regulation a long time ago. We have a small registration system, but it's not transparent at all. We have a big debate since 20 years now to make a new one, and perhaps we have a new lobby register for the first time in the next 8 weeks. This could be really possible in the way, like Stewart mentioned, also it's done in the UK. but this was not directly linked to the Corona crisis. It was a long ongoing debate because power needs justification, and also consultancy firms, public affairs firms like us, we have to be aware that if you're a part of the democratic process, you have to be kind of controlling system. So, but if you see digitalization in the last 20 years, I'm doing my business, digitalization have a kind of clear direction to make political management, political procedures much more transparent. In the old time, in the last century, in the German capital was born as a small club. Today, it's completely different. You have so many actors, so many important people doing politics, doing interest, and bringing interest to the politicians. It's more transparent than ever. Because of digitalization is an important channel to make things easier, to communicate, to explain, and also be transparent.
Ivan, can you hear us? I think you're on mute.
Oh, yeah, I was muted. Sorry. Thank you, Mr. Meier. I said so many great thoughts from all of you. We definitely chose a great subject, such a great topic for everybody here. So let's wrap it up with 3 most important takeaways from the pandemic. Dr. Thompson, what would be your 3 takeaways from the pandemic?
This was arguably the most challenging task that you set us, Ivan. I think I trying to sort of distill everything down into just sort of 3 points. But the 3 that I came up with were, first of all, that we shouldn't lose sight of the fundamentals of talking to the right people at the right time. So the basics of public affairs remain the same, frankly, whether we're in a pandemic, outside, doesn't matter. So that's the first one. Secondly, I think a little bit more forward thinking is that politically governments, particularly now vaccines are generally here to one degree or another, and rollouts are starting to some level or another. Governments need to move on. They need to get beyond COVID, and they need to start doing things again. They need to start the normal operations of government, which I sort of touched on earlier on. So, sorry, this is a rather long-winded second point, but so the more that you can help in that process, the more that you can come up with those policies, the better. And then that brings me on to the third point, which is that good ideas are good ideas for government, and if you can come up with those now with timescales that look, not instant delivery, but reasonably deliverable in a good period of time, then government will be looking to listen again, and will be looking to move beyond those policies. They're politicians; they've got to be re-elected. So we come back to those fundamentals of public affairs, I think.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Meier, what would be your 3 most important takeaways?
I started with 3 small points, but I agree with Stewart. All what is told us. So from the business side, because many students are here, the public affairs is resilient because of the people need experience and orientation in crisis more than ever. That is a really, really important point. And really, digitalization is very important, but I think Stewart, Anna, and I, we agree totally. In our work, digitalization will never replace face-to-face meetings, communication, because of the question of trust. And the third point is be optimistic and flexible. That's our job. Our consultant business in public affairs is you start in the morning with some issues and you never know what's coming over the day. And you're doing complete other things in the afternoon than you expected in the morning. And this kind of optimistic and flexible view is also for our health and for our mind mentality a really important thing.
Oh, great. Thank you. Well, it sounds kind of scary, when you wake up and you do not know what is coming during the day, but that is why this is such a great...
This is my normal life. I explain all my younger colleagues here in our office or in the association. That's our normal life.
Hey, thank you. Professor Bovan, how about yours 3 takeaways?
I think that the first one, I kind of mentioned it at the beginning, is that the fact that, and also Dominik made a little reference to it, I think that we all have to learn a lot more, well, all of us, meaning mostly the interest groups, the shall we say, the ones who will use public affairs and lobbying, and the number of those has definitely risen during actually now subscribe to it. So I think that it will need to be, lobbying will need to be taken into risk management, risk planning, change management tools, and knowledge concerning how to do it in a professional, transparent way will, I think, be boosted and will need to be boosted after this. I think it'll be a consequence of the pandemic. So a lot more preparation in time, long-term planning, everything the risk management actually involves, which includes lobbying and public affairs skills and knowledge, and to be ready. The second one is that we clearly need to perfect this digital model, but I think especially when I'm now talking a little more specifically, and I think this is the benefit of having 3 different centers in Europe, and Serbia, which represents a specific one for the Southeast Europe, I guess is the same. And that is that we need to involve more the decision makers, the politicians, to get used to the digital channel, and which clearly implies more transparency. And Dominik, as you said, they always need to explain why they do it. Well, in some countries they need to explain more, and in some they somehow explain less. So I think that more transparency and getting used to the digital way of doing things will actually also happen, and I think we need to hold them to kind of account to this, because public affairs does not work without the public side. So they're a partner in lobbying and in everything we do. And the last one is more partnership with government. Clearly, when a crisis strikes, then everybody's in a real big deep hole, and there is a lot more solidarity needed, and a government needs a helping hand, although in many situations it doesn't, but then it does. And I think that the best of the public affairs practitioners and lobbyists have actually offered to be the partners in a crisis like this, and then to give help and be a helping hand and a friendly hand, and do whatever they can, and they can do quite a lot if you let them, to actually help around, and maybe this has improved lots of the links and connections because the pandemic happened, and some wise people knew what to do and how to not let the big crisis go to waste. So these would be my 3, Ivan. Thanks.
Thank you, Professor. Yeah, it would be very interesting to see more interaction and partnerships with the government, as well to see how to involve more politicians using digital technology and or regulations concerning it. Thank you for great thoughts, great discussion. At the beginning, we said that we will have a small Q&A session. We have some pretty interesting questions. Thank you, Milos, Jovana, and Nathan, for your questions. So I would like to start with the first question. You can decide who of you would like to answer it. So Milos asks, Milos wants to know, how can we bridge the gap between necessary socializing and lobbying via the internet?
Well, okay, let me start. How do you see so necessary socializing for lobbying via internet? I guess if I'm reading the question correctly, as the digital has grown, clearly, as we made clear, and everybody is actually aware of that, I think this will become a lot more a normal practice. So socializing definitely, but especially with decision makers, would have to become a normal, not the dominant way. I absolutely agree with Stewart. The fundamentals are there, will stay there. the personal discussion, all the multisensory environment that a direct talk in a specific space allows, will clearly still say the same. But yeah, there will be some coffees and cocktails and parliamentary breakfasts, as Dominik mentioned, which will be taking place on Zoom, and they should be actually taking place on Zoom a lot more. I think there is a lot to say on transparency concerning that. So I think that yes, socializing will be on the rise, and lobbying using the online channels will definitely be more present. Maybe not prevalent, but yes, definitely more present. I hope I'm answering to Milos, and thanks for the compliment.
Thank you, Professor, and thank you, Milos. We have one pretty long question from Jovana, so I will read it, and well, we can decide who can provide the answer. So Jovana says, my question is about digitalization. It was mentioned a few times that pandemic did push forward the digitalization in the topic of PR, PA, and lobbying, but most of people would still go back to normal ways after the pandemic is done. Did you think about pushing the digital lobbying as a new way of normal, since it lowers the expenses, but also at the same time needed and gives a broader target market? And if yes, what would be the steps to have it done, and what time frame would be needed for that? So it's kind of a long question. Dr. Thompson, Mr. Meier?
I don't mind going first. I mean, there's quite a lot to unpick in the question. I think what I would point to is that politicians themselves, and if we think about more about the social media side, aren't very good at social media by and large. They're very good at pumping information out through social media channels, but they don't listen. There's not that dialogue element. So in some ways, we need politicians to be better at social media if those channels are to become generally more important in everything we do every day. Now, it does lower the costs, absolutely. So it makes it much more of an option for campaigning groups and maybe campaigns that we would be involved in as well to be able to do that. But again, that makes it, if you like, a more crowded marketplace. So more people out there, lower cost, more noise. So again, back to us as practitioners, how do we cut through that? How do we make sure the messages are right? How do we make sure that the people are listening? Now, maybe that means tying it in with more the media relations, traditional media relations side of things, that may be campaigning groups who are getting individuals at home just to do social media stuff because it's cheap and quick and easy, might not have those sort of capabilities or resources to be able to do that we or our clients would have. So I'm not sure that's entirely answering the question, but I think it's, there is still a role for us as professionals to help cut through that. So yes, it widens it, but you still need to get those fundamentals right, I think.
Thank you, Dr. Thompson. Professor Bovan, Mr. Meier, would you like to add something to this question?
No,
okay.
Thanks.
Thank you. Professor Bovan, we have from Nathan one question for you. It says, can you tell us of lobbying in any specific industries that will see a boost?
Yes, I think that there is telehealth, the online health services. I think they've kind of given a big push, clearly because of such a huge pressure on the health systems. And they've also been lobbying quite a lot to get more regulatory leeway because of whatever they needed to lobby for and get as a regulatory approval. It was a long process. There was a lot of trust, a lot of trials, a lot of checking. And since they were obviously a needed service and a needed profession, and in such a situation, they kind of pushed for more regulatory leeway and to get through some of the loopholes much faster. So they're not trying to get it easier, but just faster, so they can actually function. I think I read somewhere, now it's difficult to remember, but I think like they had like a boost of 400% during the pandemic. So telehealth is I think one of those industries that will definitely, and then clearly anything digital, but especially well, we don't need to talk about Amazon and everything else. It's so obvious. And of course, the losers, the airline industry, and what's been happening there. It's very worrying. But yeah, telehealth, I'd say, is one of those specific industries. Thanks.
Thank you, Professor Bovan. We have our last question for today. It's from Sarah. First of all, Sarah, thank you for your lovely wishes. And Sarah says, my question is, interpersonal contact is crucial to any cooperation, but if the pandemic lasts longer than expected, do you think that business will go in the direction of full digitalization? So digitalization is definitely a hot topic here today.
So I think it's my part to start now, and I don't think so. We discussed the situation, and as a hybrid of our future work will be the new normal, like the second lady asked for it. The new normal means, on one hand, I see much more digitalization regarding contact with our clients worldwide. I think the time of flying around the world, unfortunately, will be over. Client business will much more digitalization than ever. But I think on the other hand, as soon as we can, the COVID is over, if you have direct contacts with the political sector, it's much more face-to-face back. And yes, and coming back to Stewart, digitalization and the new channels are a new important pillar in the whole political system. This means also in Germany, social media for politicians is a key element outside of campaigning. And what I've learned also for me, because I have to use every day all this, because it's so cost and time effective, is be doing politics in the inner circle via social media. This means if we would have positioning of top politicians in some issues, we're looking on social media what he's saying. So for this is more than ever will be social media in the public affairs sector. We speak on an information monitoring intelligence tool. And also what we are doing for our clients is a kind of new report products to see every week sentiments. So we look what's the most important topic, who is the most important people, to see on the day or weekly or monthly level, what are the issues, who is the most important people who are reacting and interacting, and to bring this in your strategy. That's the point I see in kind of development. But I'm absolutely confident that our business, it will be in kind of hybrid and balancing between the normal world to see people and the digital world on the other side.
Thank you, Mr. Meier. That sounds about right. So we do not have any more questions. So to wrap up the day, we learned that we have to live with the digitalization. We saw a new look at the transparency. Lobbying has definitely increased with many new actors, and we should prepare better. As Professor Bovan said, more preparation on risk analysis and risk management. Once again, so many great thoughts here today, very informative for everyone, very important for everyone. Huge thank you to all of you. Huge thank you to the Metropolitan team behind the scenes, let's put it that way. And thank you very much to all of you who were here with us today, and thank you for the great questions.
Thanks even to you for hosting this.
Yeah, of course. The pleasure isn't only mine. The pleasure is also at the university as well. Thank you once again.